The glass walls of the 37th floor reflected the night skyline like a mirror made of stars. Inside the executive conference room, the long, polished table stretched beneath cold white lights, surrounded by leather chairs that cost more than most people's monthly rent. At the head of the table stood Alexandra Frost. Her posture was straight, precise, almost mechanical. A charcoal suit hung perfectly on her shoulders, and the glow of the laptop screen illuminated sharp eyes that rarely blinked when she spoke. People called her many things behind closed doors. The Ice Queen, the Steel CEO, the woman who never smiles. Alexandra didn't care what they called her. She cared about results. Tonight's meeting was supposed to be the most important one of the year. On the screen in front of her sat the documents for a billion-dollar merger, months of negotiations, legal reviews, and financial projections compressed into a series of slides that could transform the company overnight. The executives in the room shifted nervously while waiting for the presentation to begin. No one spoke. No one dared. Because Alexandra Frost hated wasted time. And she hated mistakes even more. Outside the conference room, the quiet hallway smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. Down the corridor, a man walked quickly while balancing a small toolbox in one hand and a bundle of cables in the other. His name was Liam Carter. Most people in the building didn't know that name. To them, he was simply the IT guy. The man who fixed printers. The man who reset forgotten passwords. The man who appeared quietly when something broke and disappeared, just as quietly when it worked again. Liam wore a plain shirt that had been ironed quickly that morning, though the wrinkles had returned after a long day of moving between server rooms and office cubicles. Dark circles under his eyes showed the evidence of another short night of sleep. But despite the exhaustion, his movements were calm and steady. 3 years earlier, Liam Carter had lived a very different life. Back then, he was known across the cybersecurity field as one of the brightest engineers in the industry. He built defensive systems that protected massive networks from invisible threats. Companies paid him large salaries to safeguard their secrets. He had colleagues who respected him, a wife who believed in him, and a future that seemed secure. Then everything changed. It began with a security flaw he discovered while reviewing a company server. Liam reported the issue immediately, expecting appreciation for preventing a potential breach. Instead, the investigation turned against him. Executives panicked about the vulnerability becoming public. Rather than admitting the system's weakness, they needed someone to blame. Someone convenient. Someone replaceable. The accusation spread quickly. They said Liam had created the vulnerability himself. They said he planned to exploit it. They said he couldn't be trusted. Within days, his reputation collapsed. He was fired, blacklisted. Doors that once opened easily now closed before he even reached them. Then tragedy struck again. 6 months after losing his career, Liam's wife died in a sudden car accident on a rainy highway. The world that remained felt quiet and empty, except for one small voice. "Daddy." That voice belonged to Lily Carter, his 7-year-old daughter. She became the only reason Liam kept moving forward. He didn't need a prestigious career anymore. He needed stability. He needed time. He needed a job that allowed him to pick his daughter up from school every afternoon. So he accepted the first offer he received. Its support, low pay, little recognition, but flexible hours. And that was enough. Every morning followed the same routine. Liam would wake before sunrise, prepare Lily's breakfast, and walk her to the daycare near their apartment. She always waved before entering the building. "Have a good day fixing computers, Daddy." He always smiled. "I will." After dropping her off, Liam would take the subway downtown to the towering glass headquarters, where hundreds of employees worked beneath fluorescent lights and endless deadlines. He arrived early, left early, worked quietly. Most people never noticed him, except when something stopped working. And today, something important had stopped working. Inside the executive conference room, frustration was growing. The projector that should display the merger presentation refused to turn on. One of the executives checked his watch nervously. Meeting starts in 15 minutes. Alexandra crossed her arms. Call it. Moments later, Liam received the request on his phone. Executive floor. Projector failure. Urgent. He sighed softly and picked up his toolbox. As the elevator doors closed around him, Liam leaned against the wall and rubbed his eyes briefly. His phone vibrated again. A message from Lily. Daddy, did you eat dinner? He smiled while typing a reply. Yes, sweetheart, did you finish your homework? 3 dots appeared. Almost, I'm drawing you a picture. His chest warmed slightly. No rush, I can't wait to see it. The elevator dinged. 37th floor. When the doors opened, the quiet tension of the executive hallway wrapped around him immediately. A young assistant led him toward the glass conference room. Inside, dozens of powerful people sat around the table. Lawyers, financial advisors, department heads, and at the center, Alexandra Frost. Liam stepped inside quietly. Projector issue, he asked. Alexandra barely glanced up from her laptop. Fix it fast. He nodded and walked toward the equipment mounted on the ceiling. Kneeling beside the cables, Liam began checking connections. HDMI, power supply, signal port. Everything appeared correct. He unplugged and reconnected the cables carefully. The screen flickered, then went dark again. Behind him, someone whispered impatiently. Is it fixed yet? Liam stayed calm. Technical problems rarely solved themselves under pressure. He opened the projector settings and reset the connection. For a moment, the screen lit up. A document appeared. Rows of financial numbers. Contract clauses. Acquisition percentages. Sensitive details worth billions. Liam didn't read them. He only glanced long enough to confirm the display was working. But Alexandra saw the glance. Her laptop slammed shut with a sharp crack that echoed across the room. Everyone froze. Her voice cut through the silence like ice. Peek again and you're fired. The words hung in the air. Some executives exchanged smirks. Others looked uncomfortable. Liam slowly stood up. His face flushed slightly from embarrassment, but his voice remained steady. Ma'am, he said calmly, if I wanted to look at your company's secrets, they wouldn't still be secrets. The room went completely silent. A few people shifted in their chairs. Someone whispered, what did he just say? Alexandra stared at him. Not angry, not surprised, but curious, because the man standing in front of her did not sound like an ordinary IT technician. There was confidence in his voice. Not arrogance, not fear, just certainty. And something about that certainty made Alexandra uneasy. She studied his face more carefully. The tired eyes, the calm posture, the quiet patience. She turned toward the executives. Meeting postponed. Someone began to protest. She raised one finger. Everyone out. Chairs scraped the floor as the room emptied quickly. Within moments, only 2 people remained inside the glass conference room. Alexandra Frost and Liam Carter. She walked slowly toward him until only a few feet separated them. Explain your sentence, she said. Liam reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. For several seconds, he scrolled through files. Then he turned the screen toward her. 3 weeks ago, he said quietly, I detected unauthorized login attempts targeting your confidential merger folder. Her eyes narrowed. How many? 17. Alexandra felt her pulse quicken. And you didn't report it. I wanted proof first. He tapped the screen again. A dashboard appeared showing login attempts, timestamps, and IP addresses. I blocked access temporarily and created a monitoring system. Alexandra leaned closer to read the information. Her breathing slowed, then stopped, because the account name attempting access was familiar. Very familiar. It belonged to someone she trusted. Someone who attended every high-level strategy meeting. Someone who knew everything. Alexandra stepped back. That can't be right. Liam didn't argue. He simply showed the evidence. The logs. The addresses. The patterns. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Who? Liam hesitated, then spoke carefully. I think you should see it happen. Alexandra crossed her arms again, but this time the gesture looked less confident. What do you mean? A trap. He explained the plan. A fake document. Digital trackers. Real-time monitoring. If the person tried to steal the file again, they would have undeniable proof. Alexandra stared at him for a long moment. Trusting someone with company secrets terrified her. But something about Liam's calm honesty felt different from everyone else she had worked with. Finally, she nodded. Do it. That night, long after most employees left the building, the two of them sat in a small conference room illuminated only by laptop screens. Liam built the digital trap piece by piece. Every detail precise. Every tracker invisible. Alexandra watched quietly. For the first time in years, she wasn't completely alone while protecting her company. And though she didn't realize it yet, the quiet IT technician beside her was about to change far more than just her security system. He was about to change her understanding of trust. That night, the 37th floor felt different from the rest of the building. The usual daytime noise was gone, the ringing phones had stopped, the elevators moved less often, and even the city outside seemed quieter through the wide walls of glass. The conference rooms that had been packed with legal teams and executives a few hours earlier now stood dark and empty, but in one smaller room near the executive wing, a single lamp remained on. Liam sat at the table with his laptop open, sleeves rolled up, his expression calm in the same way it always was when something serious had to be done. Across from him sat Alexandra Frost, no longer standing like an untouchable CEO in command of a billion-dollar machine, but sitting like a woman who had just discovered that fear she thought she had under control had been right beside her all along. On the screen between them, Liam was building a perfect digital decoy, a merger file that looked real enough to fool anyone who opened it. It had all the right headings, the proper legal formatting, the type of pricing models only senior leadership would expect to see, and enough believable detail to appear genuine to any insider. But beneath the normal-looking pages, Liam embedded trackers so carefully that they would remain invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. The file would record access attempts, device fingerprints, download behavior, transfer routes, and even whether screenshots were taken while it was open. Alexandra watched him work in silence for several minutes, and what unsettled her most was not just how good he was, but how quietly good he was. There was no performance in him, no need to impress her, no trace of resentment for how she had spoken to him earlier. He simply did the work because it needed to be done. That alone made him harder for her to understand than any ambitious executive she had ever hired. After a while, Alexandra broke the silence and asked him how he had learned to build systems like that so quickly. Liam didn't answer at once. He finished placing the final monitoring sequence into the document, saved the file to a secure directory, and then leaned back slightly before replying. He told her that there had been a time when entire companies trusted him with much more than one decoy file. He had led large-scale information security projects, trained teams, responded to breach threats, and built internal defense frameworks for organizations that never bothered to understand how much danger they were in until he showed them. He spoke without bitterness, but not without weight. He told her that good security work was rarely noticed when done properly, because the best outcome was that nothing happened, no crisis, no headlines, no disaster, only silence. People celebrated visible growth and glamorous leadership, but almost no one celebrated the person who quietly kept collapse from happening in the background. Alexandra listened more carefully than she expected to. She had spent years measuring people by presence, speed, sharpness, and control. Yet sitting across from Liam, she began to understand that some of the strongest people in a company were the ones nobody looked at twice. When she asked him what had happened at his old job, he paused long enough that she almost regretted asking. Then he told her. He described how he had discovered a serious flaw, how he had reported it honestly, and how quickly the room had turned against him once the leadership realized the fallout might damage their own reputations. He explained how fear and politics could twist facts faster than truth could catch up. He said they had needed someone small enough to sacrifice and skilled enough to accuse, and he had been both. Alexandra looked down at the table when he said that, because she knew exactly how often companies protected themselves by crushing the person easiest to lose. For a moment, the conversation drifted away from the trap and toward the private ruins both of them carried. Liam mentioned his daughter, Lily, not dramatically and not for sympathy, but with the simple softness of a father whose whole life had narrowed into one sacred responsibility. He said that after his wife died, he had stopped looking for work that looked impressive and started looking for work that let him show up at school pickup on time. He said that people assumed his position reflected his ability, but the truth was that his schedule reflected his priorities. Alexandra stared at him then, because she had not thought of something that way in years. She had spent so long believing success required constant sacrifice that she had never considered the possibility that a person could be capable of more and still choose less prestige in order to protect something more valuable. It unsettled her in a way financial risk never had. She asked him how old Lily was, and when he said 7, something in her expression changed. She told him, more quietly than she intended, that when she was 7 her father had already become a stranger who funded her life but did not live inside it. He built companies, acquired rivals, traveled constantly, and convinced himself that providing everything money could buy was the same thing as being present. Alexandra said she grew up in beautiful houses full of expensive furniture and an emotional coldness no one ever named. She had sworn when she was younger that she would never become someone who valued power more than people, but somewhere along the way ambition and fear had combined into something harder. Liam did not comfort her in the usual empty way. He only said, very gently, that pain often makes promises we don't realize we are still obeying years later. She looked at him for a long second and then looked away, because she felt more seen by one calm sentence from the invisible IT contractor than by years of polished executive conversation. A little after midnight, Liam's monitoring dashboard lit up. He didn't react dramatically. He simply straightened, focused, and said, "Someone's in." Alexandra was on her feet before she realized she had moved. The account accessing the secure folder belonged to Nicole Barrett, the senior strategy director. Nicole had been one of the few people Alexandra trusted to remain in the room when everyone else was asked to leave. She had worked beside her for years, knew the company's long-term plans, understood the merger stakes, and had often been the person Alexandra relied on to anticipate political fallout before it landed. Alexandra's first instinct was denial. She whispered that it had to be a spoofed credential or a hijacked device. Liam said nothing until the next layer of data appeared. Residential IP address, personal laptop signature, session timing, behavior path. The file opened page by page, not quickly like an automated scrape, but slowly like someone reading with intent. Then came the download request. Alexandra felt a cold heaviness spread through her body. The person on the screen was not just trespassing into confidential material. She was handling it like someone who knew exactly what she was trying to obtain. Liam activated the deeper capture tools, carefully preserving the session, recording interactions, and timestamping each step. He remained composed, but Alexandra could feel the gravity of the moment in the stillness of the room. They watched the file copy complete. Then the user logged out. No alarm sounded. No dramatic music played. The building stayed quiet, the city lights still glittered outside, and yet everything had changed. Truth had entered the room and sat down between them. Alexandra lowered herself into the nearest chair as if her knees no longer trusted her. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she asked the question that mattered least and most at the same time. "Why?" Liam shut his laptop halfway, not to hide the evidence but to slow the moment down. He told her that motive often arrived after proof, not before it. Fear, greed, resentment, self-preservation, loyalty to someone outside the company, private debt, ambition, humiliation, revenge. People rarely betrayed for just one reason. Alexandra pressed a hand to her forehead and stared at the dark tabletop. She thought about all the meetings, all the confidences shared, all the strategic conversations in which Nicole had nodded with complete understanding, all the moments she had believed proximity meant loyalty. Liam did not rush her. He knew better than most that the first pain of betrayal was not the damage itself, but the instant rewriting of memory. Suddenly, every kindness looked suspicious, every loyalty looked conditional, every past conversation demanded reinterpretation. At last, Alexandra asked him what came next. He told her the company needed a clean process, preserve the evidence, involve legal counsel at the right level, avoid confrontation before the record was fully secured, and prevent any chance of evidence destruction. He spoke clearly, not as a contractor guessing in unfamiliar territory, but as someone who had managed high-stakes incidents before. Alexandra listened and nodded. Her voice returned slowly, but with less sharpness than usual. She asked him if he would stay through the morning and help oversee the response. He said yes without hesitation. She thanked him, and when she did, the words sounded strange in her own mouth, as though gratitude had been absent from the executive floor for too long. Round 1 in the morning, Liam's phone vibrated. A message from Lily's babysitter said she had fallen asleep on the couch holding the drawing she wanted to show him. Liam smiled at the image and typed back a quick thank you. Alexandra noticed. There was tiredness in his face, but not the self-pitying exhaustion she had seen in executives who considered one delayed dinner a personal tragedy. His tiredness looked lived in, disciplined, shaped around love. She asked if he wanted to go home. He replied that he would once the evidence had been duplicated and secured. She watched as he methodically created encrypted backups, documented the chain of events, and prepared a summary clear enough for legal review but narrow enough to protect the integrity of the investigation. The further the night went, the more Alexandra felt the strange inversion of the day. In the morning, she had humiliated him publicly over a glance at a screen. By midnight, she was relying on him more than anyone else in the company. The thought stung, not because she disliked depending on him, but because it forced her to confront the kind of leader fear had made her. For years, she had confused suspicion with intelligence and harshness with strength. Yet the person who had best protected her company had not done so through intimidation, ego, or control. He had done it through patience, discipline, and restraint. Before they left the building, Liam handed Alexandra a concise printed summary and told her not to confront Nicole emotionally in the first meeting. He said betrayal made people defensive long before it made them honest, and that accusations delivered in anger often gave the guilty more room to deny, redirect, or destroy. Alexandra almost smiled at the irony of being instructed on composure by the very man she had publicly threatened hours earlier. Still, she accepted the advice. When they stepped into the hallway, the floor was empty and silent. The glass walls reflected them side by side, the feared CEO and the overlooked single father walking out of a crisis no one else even knew had reached its peak. At the elevator, Alexandra asked him a question she had not planned to ask. She asked why he stayed calm when people treated him as if he were invisible or less important than he really was. Liam looked at the closing elevator doors for a moment before answering. He said anger had once cost him too much, and now every reaction he chose had to be something his daughter could be proud of one day. He said Lily noticed everything, his tone, his face, the weight he carried home. He wanted her to grow up believing that strength was not measured by how loudly a person answered disrespect, but by whether they could remain steady without becoming cruel. Alexandra stood very still after he said that. It was such a simple philosophy, yet it felt stronger than half the leadership books stacked on executive shelves. When the elevator arrived, Liam stepped inside, turned, and told her he would be back before 8. She nodded, but after the doors closed, she remained in the hallway alone for several seconds, replaying his words. The next morning, the company moved as it always did, polished and efficient on the surface, unaware that one of its deepest fractures had already been mapped. People carried coffee into meetings, assistants walked briskly between departments, and the merger remained the central topic whispered through glass offices and open-plan desks. Nicole Barrett arrived at 8:12 a.m. wearing a cream blazer and a composed expression. She greeted staff with her usual precision, answered 2 messages in the elevator, and entered the executive wing with the confidence of someone who believed she still belonged at the center of power. Liam was already there in a smaller conference room with internal counsel and an outside legal advisor. Alexandra arrived moments later, not with fury, but with a stillness that made everyone in the room sit straighter. The evidence file lay in front of her. She had not slept much, but her eyes no longer looked panicked. They looked settled in a hard truth. When Nicole was called in, she entered expecting strategy. Instead, she found legal counsel, a quiet contractor she probably had never properly noticed, and a CEO whose voice was colder than usual but less theatrical than anyone expected. Nicole sat. The door closed. Alexandra informed her that an internal security review had uncovered unauthorized attempts to access restricted merger files. At first, Nicole's face revealed only confusion, then offense, then practiced disbelief. She said there must be some mistake. Liam presented the timestamps. She said credentials could be stolen. He presented the device signature and location data. She said someone could have planted it. He presented the behavioral record and the tracked file session. For the first time, Nicole stopped interrupting. The room felt smaller then, as if truth itself had consumed some of the oxygen. Alexandra asked her directly whether she had accessed the material. Nicole looked at her, and in that pause years of professional performance seemed to tremble. The confession did not come immediately. What came first was anger. Nicole accused the company of cultivating fear, of making senior leaders feel disposable, of pushing everyone to protect themselves because trust did not really exist inside the culture Alexandra had built. She said she had spent years carrying impossible strategic burdens while being treated as useful rather than valued. She said she had begun keeping options open because she no longer believed loyalty would save her if the merger failed. Liam stayed silent while Alexandra absorbed the words. They were ugly words, self-serving in their timing, but not entirely false. That was what made them dangerous. Finally, Nicole admitted she had intended to leverage the information, not necessarily to destroy the company, but to preserve her own future. She had convinced herself it was precaution, not betrayal. Alexandra listened without changing expression, yet inside something was breaking. Not only the last piece of trust she had placed in Nicole, but the illusion that control alone could keep people honest. When the legal team took over, Alexandra ended the meeting and walked out before her composure cracked. Liam followed at a respectful distance. In the hallway, she placed one hand on the glass wall and looked down over the city. She did not cry. She did not shout. She only said that she had built her entire leadership style around the idea that if she feared betrayal enough, she could prevent it. Liam replied that fear could detect some dangers, but it could not build loyalty. Only fairness could do that. She turned and looked at him then with the expression of someone standing at the edge of a realization she had resisted for years. For the second time in less than 24 hours, the person she had underestimated most had told her the truth she most needed to hear. And this time, she was ready to listen. By midday, the executive floor no longer felt like a place of absolute confidence. Nothing publicly explosive had been announced yet, but corporate buildings have their own kind of weather, and people sense pressure before they know its source. The assistants outside conference rooms spoke a little more quietly. Department heads answered messages with more caution. Even the elevators seemed to carry tension upward as the rumor of an internal legal matter moved invisibly through the company. Alexandra remained in her office with the blinds partially open, looking out at the city while documents from counsel accumulated on her desk. Nicole had been placed on immediate administrative suspension pending the formal investigation, her access revoked, her devices secured, and her communications limited under corporate procedure. It was the correct response, the disciplined response, the response Alexandra herself had demanded many times in other cases. Yet this time the clean professionalism of the process did nothing to quiet what she felt. The betrayal was personal not because Nicole had been the most talented person in the room, but because she had been the one person Alexandra had gradually allowed inside the guarded perimeter she built around herself after surviving earlier treachery. That made the wound sharper. She realized with bitter clarity that fear had made her selective, but not wise. She had mistaken shared ambition for shared integrity. Across the hall, Liam spent the morning helping legal and compliance teams understand the technical evidence chain. He answered every question plainly, documented every step, and never once tried to inflate his role in what had happened. The more people learned what he had done, the more the building's perception of him started to shift. Staff who had previously walked past him without a second glance now greeted him by name. Managers who once treated him like a utility suddenly spoke with a layer of respect. Liam noticed the difference, but it did not seem to change him. He still went downstairs to clear a basic permissions issue for an overworked payroll assistant, still returned a printer call nobody else wanted, and still took 15 seconds between tasks to check whether Lily had eaten her lunch at school. If the company was only now discovering his value, he seemed to have made peace long ago with not being seen. Late that afternoon, Alexandra asked Liam to come to her office. It was the first time she had invited him there rather than summoning him as if he were a function attached to a help ticket. Her office was wide and elegant, with minimalist furniture, framed market awards, and the kind of view that usually made visitors feel smaller. Liam entered carrying a tablet and a slim folder, but the atmosphere did not feel formal in the old sense. Alexandra did not remain standing behind her desk. Instead, she sat near the window and motioned for him to take the chair opposite her. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then she apologized. Not in the half-strategic way powerful people often apologize when they are really trying to move past discomfort quickly, but directly. She told him that the way she had treated him in the boardroom had been unfair and humiliating. She said that fear did not excuse disrespect, and that she had let years of suspicion turn her into someone who publicly punished before privately understanding. Liam listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said he accepted the apology. He did not dramatize the moment or make her work for forgiveness. That somehow made the apology matter more. Alexandra admitted that what unsettled her most was not just Nicole's access, but the fact that the person who had protected the company best was the one she had least respected. Liam replied that titles often hide character while quiet work reveals it. He did not say it to shame her. He said it like a principle of life he had already tested against pain. She asked him, almost reluctantly, whether he had ever wanted to leave the company because of how people treated him. He looked at the photograph of the skyline behind her desk and answered honestly. He said there were days he felt invisible enough to disappear without anyone noticing, but every month the paycheck covered rent, and every afternoon the schedule let him pick up Lily on time. So he stayed. What sounded to him like simple truth sounded to Alexandra like an indictment of how narrow leadership vision had become in her company. The next week unfolded with the controlled velocity of a corporate crisis moving through hidden channels. Legal interviews continued. External counsel reviewed possible exposure. The board was briefed at a high level. The merger partners were informed that an internal security incident had been detected and contained before material compromise of the actual deal documents. Because Liam's decoy had intercepted the attempt, the real merger package remained untouched, and that fact preserved the transaction from immediate collapse. Yet even amid the professionalism of the response, another story quietly grew in the building. Employees learned that the quiet single dad from IT had not only identified the threat, but had built much of the internal security architecture years earlier when the company could not afford a full consulting team. People pieced together fragments they had ignored before. How he solved complex issues too quickly for a normal support role, how senior systems rarely failed under his maintenance, how he never bragged, and how often he left exactly on time because he always had somewhere more important to be. The story spread not because Liam told it, but because truth has a way of surfacing once the right person starts paying attention. In the cafeteria, people who used to speak over him now asked for his opinion. In meetings, managers waited for him to finish before jumping in. The respect felt overdue, but it also carried an awkwardness that comes when people realize they misjudged someone for a long time. Liam handled it the same way he handled everything else, with quiet steadiness. He thanked people, answered what he could, and went back to work. He did not punish them for not seeing him sooner. That restraint affected more than he knew. One afternoon, as rain streaked the windows and turned the skyline silver, Liam was preparing to leave when his phone buzzed with a message from Lily's school. She had drawn a family picture during art hour and wanted him to see it as soon as he arrived. He smiled and slipped the phone into his pocket just as Alexandra stepped out of a nearby meeting room. She noticed the shift in his expression and asked if everything was all right. He told her it was more than all right. It was a drawing emergency, which in Lily's world meant a masterpiece had been created, and immediate parental admiration was required. For the first time since he had known her, Alexandra laughed without reservation. It was brief but real. She asked if he ever worried that leaving on time made people think he wasn't committed enough to his career. Liam answered that for a while he did worry about that. Then one day Lily had asked him why grown-ups were always promising children that family mattered most while acting like work mattered more. He said that question had embarrassed him so deeply that he stopped pretending there was honor in being absent from the people who loved you. He told Alexandra that success means very little if the people you say you're doing it for only get the leftovers of your time. She stood there in the rain-dim hallway, hearing something she had never allowed herself to hear clearly. Because the truth was that she had been giving her whole life to a machine that could replace her faster than any child could forget her. She watched Liam head for the elevator with no apology in his steps, and for the first time she wondered whether the strongest person in the building was not the one who stayed latest, but the one who knew exactly when to leave. That evening, Alexandra remained in the office long after the floor emptied. She opened an old email archive she had not looked at in years, messages from the former partner who had betrayed her long before Nicole ever did. Back then, she had vowed never again to allow closeness to become vulnerability. She had translated that vow into a culture of control, fewer confidences, harsher standards, less warmth, more distance, more surveillance, more instinctive correction than encouragement. It had worked well enough on paper. Performance stayed high. Fear kept mistakes hidden, but now she could see the cost more clearly. Fear had not actually protected the company from betrayal. It had only convinced decent people to stay quiet and anxious people to protect themselves in ugly ways. Liam had done the opposite. He had created safety not by intimidating everyone around him, but by behaving in a way that made truth easier to trust. He had waited for proof before accusation. He had preserved dignity while pursuing accountability. He had chosen calm over humiliation. Alexandra closed the email archive and sat in the dim light with a thought that felt almost unbearable in its simplicity. She had spent years trying to make herself impossible to hurt, and in doing so had become someone difficult to trust. That was when she made her first real leadership decision not based on fear. She asked Human Resources to draft a company-wide conduct initiative focused on professional respect, private correction, and zero tolerance for public humiliation by managers at any level. She scheduled listening sessions with department teams, not for optics, but because she suddenly understood how little she actually knew about what her people felt. And before leaving, she sent Liam a short message asking if he could meet with her the next morning regarding the future structure of the company's information security function. When Liam entered her office the following day, Alexandra was prepared. She did not waste time circling around the point. She told him the company needed a permanent head of information security, someone capable not just of managing technical systems, but of building a healthier security culture from the inside out. She said the role would report directly to her, include a significant salary increase, and come with authority to hire and train a proper team. Liam looked genuinely surprised, not theatrically modest, but honestly taken off guard. He asked why she was offering it to him when, by the company's public standards, he was still just a support contractor. Alexandra said that was precisely the problem. Public standards had overlooked the person with the most integrity in the room. She told him that skill could be found in many places, but character under pressure was rare, and the company needed both. She also added something that mattered even more. The position would be structured with flexibility. He would still be able to pick up Lily from school every day. There would be no hidden expectation that leadership meant surrendering his life at home. Liam did not answer immediately. He looked down for a moment, and when he looked back up there was emotion in his face he was trying not to display too openly. He told her that after everything that happened in his previous career, he had quietly stopped believing he would ever again be trusted with real responsibility. Alexandra replied that trust had not been given to him lightly. It had been earned in the most convincing way possible, when no one was watching and he could have done the easier thing. For a second, the office felt very still. Then Liam accepted. The news of his appointment moved through the company with a very different energy than the earlier whispers. This time it carried relief. Many employees had already guessed that if the company was serious about learning from the breach attempt, it would have to elevate the person who actually understood both the systems and the human failures inside them. Liam's transition into the new role did not transform him into a different man. He still wore simple shirts, still preferred direct language over jargon, still helped frontline staff instead of hiding behind title, and still kept Lily's drawings near his desk. But the authority changed what he could fix. He implemented better access controls, yes, but he also redesigned reporting pathways so lower-level employees could raise concerns without fearing immediate blame. He trained managers to distinguish suspicion from evidence. He introduced audit systems that reduced dependence on blind personal trust while also reducing the culture of panic around mistakes. In meetings, he often said that security and dignity should never be enemies inside a well-run company. Alexandra heard those words more than once and understood each time that they applied to far more than technology. The merger recovered fully and proceeded toward closing. The board expressed gratitude. Investors saw only a successfully contained incident and a strengthened governance posture. But inside the company, the deeper shift was quieter and more meaningful. People began to believe that doing the right thing might actually be noticed before catastrophe forced it into view. Weeks later, on a bright afternoon washed in early autumn sunlight, Lily visited the office for the first time. She wore a yellow sweater, held her father's hand with total confidence, and stared at the high-rise lobby as if she had entered a palace made of glass. Staff who once barely acknowledged Liam now smiled at her warmly. She walked through the security gate, looked up at her father, and whispered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "So this is the place where you fix everybody's problems." Liam laughed and told her he tried. When Alexandra came down to meet them, Lily studied her carefully in the fearless way only children can. Alexandra introduced herself, but before she could complete the formal sentence, Lily said, "You're the boss, right?" Alexandra smiled and said yes. Lily nodded solemnly and replied, "Daddy says bosses should make people feel safe, not scared." For one sharp second, Alexandra felt the words land in the exact place they were meant to. Then she crouched slightly so she was closer to Lily's eye level and said, "Your daddy is a very wise man." Liam looked almost embarrassed, but not enough to hide the pride in his face. In that simple exchange, Alexandra saw the source of his calm more clearly than ever. It wasn't only pain that had shaped him. It was responsibility. It was love. It was the fact that every day he went home to a small person who was learning what strength looked like by watching him live it. And Alexandra understood, perhaps for the first time in her adult life, that power without gentleness eventually becomes isolation. By the end of that season, the company had changed in ways that could not be captured fully in quarterly reports. Meetings became firmer but less cruel. Public shaming began to disappear because leaders had been told plainly that correction belonged in private and respect belonged everywhere. Staff who once kept their heads down started offering ideas more openly. The security team Liam built became known not just for technical excellence, but for fairness. Alexandra remained demanding, but she no longer treated severity as a personality. She learned to pause before speaking when fear rose in her chest. She learned to ask one more question before making one final judgment. And every now and then, when she passed a conference room and saw a junior employee struggling with cables or a nervous staff member fumbling through a presentation setup, she remembered the sound of her own voice saying, "Peek again and you're fired," and felt grateful that the calm reply she received had not matched her cruelty. Because that reply had done more than stop a breach. It had interrupted a cycle. It had forced a powerful woman to see the human cost of her own defenses. It had restored a broken man to the work he was meant to do. And it had proven something the whole company would remember long after the merger was signed. The people most easy to overlook are sometimes the very ones holding everything together. 6 months passed, and the company that once ran on tension and quiet fear had slowly begun to breathe differently. The headquarters building still looked the same from the outside. The same glass tower piercing the skyline, the same polished lobby, the same busy elevators carrying hundreds of employees between floors every day. But inside, something subtle yet powerful had shifted. The culture that had once been built on silent pressure and the constant expectation of mistakes being punished in public had softened into something steadier. Alexandra Frost was still known as a demanding leader, and no one doubted her intelligence or determination, but she was no longer the distant figure who ruled from behind a wall of suspicion. She listened more. She asked questions instead of issuing immediate judgments. She corrected people in private rather than humiliating them in front of their peers. Some employees were surprised at first, unsure if the change would last, but as the months passed, they realized it was not a temporary adjustment. Alexandra herself was changing, and the company was changing with her. At the center of many of those changes stood Liam Carter. His new role as head of information security had quickly proven to be more than a title. The systems he designed strengthened the company's defenses in ways that executives had never fully understood before. But more important than the technical improvements was the philosophy he brought with him. Liam believed that security was not only about protecting networks and data. It was about protecting people from the kind of fear that caused them to hide problems until those problems became disasters. Instead of creating an atmosphere where employees were terrified of reporting mistakes, he introduced systems that encouraged early transparency. When someone discovered a vulnerability, they were rewarded for speaking up rather than punished for admitting something had gone wrong. Slowly, the company began to realize that trust and accountability could exist together. The transformation did not happen overnight, but it happened steadily, and the results were undeniable. Liam himself remained the same person he had always been. Despite the larger office, the better salary, and the respect that now followed him through the halls, he still arrived at work with the same quiet focus. He still answered questions patiently, even when the person asking had once treated him like an invisible technician. He still helped the IT support team whenever they were overwhelmed. And every afternoon, just as the clock approached 3, he shut down his laptop, gathered his things, and left the building to pick up Lily from school. No meeting was allowed to interfere with that routine. When executives tried to schedule late sessions, Liam calmly suggested earlier times. He never apologized for prioritizing his daughter. The more people saw that boundary, the more they respected him for it. One afternoon in early spring, Lily visited the office again. This time she arrived wearing a bright backpack decorated with cartoon animals and carrying a small folder of drawings she wanted to show her father's coworkers. The receptionist greeted her by name, and several employees smiled as she walked through the lobby holding Liam's hand. To her, the towering building was still an exciting adventure, a place where her father solved mysterious computer problems for very serious adults. She wandered through the office with curiosity, peeking into rooms and asking questions about things she did not understand. When Alexandra came out of a meeting and saw Lily standing beside Liam's desk, she paused for a moment and watched the scene quietly. Liam was kneeling beside his daughter, listening intently as she explained a colorful picture she had drawn in class. The drawing showed a tall building, a smiling father, and a small girl standing together under a bright yellow sun. Alexandra realized that the man who had once been dismissed as a minor employee now carried something far more powerful than authority. He carried purpose. Alexandra walked over and greeted Lily warmly. The girl immediately held up the drawing and asked if she liked it. Alexandra studied the picture carefully before answering. She said it was beautiful, and she especially liked how the sun seemed to shine directly above the father and daughter. Lily nodded proudly and explained that the sun represented happiness because her father always made her feel safe. Alexandra felt something shift quietly inside her chest when she heard those words. For years she had built her identity around strength and control, believing those qualities were the foundation of leadership. But standing there beside the small girl who trusted her father completely, Alexandra understood that safety and kindness were forms of strength too. Later that day, after Liam and Lily had left, Alexandra remained alone in her office reflecting on how much had changed since that tense meeting months earlier. She remembered the moment when she had slammed her laptop shut and threatened to fire him for glancing at confidential information. At the time, she believed she was protecting the company from betrayal. But looking back, she saw something different. She saw a leader acting out of fear rather than wisdom. And she saw how close she had come to driving away the very person who would eventually save the company from real harm. That realization stayed with her longer than she expected. Not long after that reflection, another important meeting was scheduled in the executive conference room. The merger had been completed successfully, and the company was preparing to announce a new expansion strategy. Executives gathered around the familiar polished table, discussing projections and timelines. Just before the presentation began, the projector malfunctioned again, refusing to display the slides on the screen. A young technician was called in to fix the problem. He looked nervous as he entered the room, clearly aware that he was standing in front of some of the most powerful people in the organization. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted cables and tried different connections. After a moment, the screen flickered to life, briefly revealing a confidential slide before the system reset again. The technician's eyes accidentally passed over the numbers on the screen. The entire room went quiet. Several executives exchanged uneasy glances, remembering how a similar situation had once triggered an explosive reaction. They looked toward Alexandra, expecting anger or sharp criticism. But Alexandra did something very different. She smiled gently at the young technician and said calmly that it was all right. She explained that if someone had come into the room intending to steal secrets, they would not have been fixing equipment in front of 20 witnesses. The tension in the room disappeared instantly. The technician exhaled with relief and quickly finished repairing the projector. As he left, he glanced back at Alexandra with visible gratitude. In the corner of the room, Liam watched the exchange quietly. Their eyes met briefly, and both of them smiled. Neither needed to say anything. The lesson that had changed the company months earlier had just revealed itself again in the smallest moment. After the meeting ended, Alexandra and Liam walked together toward the elevator. The hallway was quiet, and the evening sunlight poured through the glass windows, casting long reflections across the floor. Alexandra turned to Liam and admitted that she had spent years believing leadership meant making people afraid of disappointing you. She said it took one calm reply from someone she had underestimated to show her that respect worked far better than fear. Liam shrugged slightly, as if the idea was obvious. He explained that calmness did not mean weakness. It meant choosing the response that helped people become better rather than pushing them further into fear. Alexandra nodded thoughtfully. She asked him if he realized how much his actions had influenced the company. Liam considered the question for a moment before answering. He said he never intended to change the company. He only wanted to do his job well and go home to his daughter every day. But sometimes, he added quietly, doing the right thing in one moment could ripple outward in ways no one expected. When the elevator doors opened, Alexandra stepped inside but turned back before the doors closed. She told Liam that the company was fortunate to have him. He smiled modestly and replied that he was fortunate to have been given a second chance. The doors slid shut, and the elevator descended toward the lobby. That evening, Liam arrived home just as Lily finished her homework. She ran toward him excitedly and asked about his day. Liam lifted her into his arms and said it had been a good day. She looked at him carefully and asked the question she always asked when she sensed something important had happened. "Did anyone yell at you today, Daddy?" Liam smiled and kissed her forehead. He told her no one had yelled and that even if someone did, he would still try to answer calmly. Lily seemed satisfied with that answer. She hugged him tightly and said she hoped she could grow up to be calm like him. Liam looked at his daughter and felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything they had survived together. The road that had brought him to this moment had been filled with loss, misunderstanding, and unfair judgment. Yet those hardships had also shaped the quiet strength that now guided his life. In a distant office high above the city, Alexandra Frost stood by the window of her building and watched the lights turn on across the skyline. She thought about the words Liam had spoken months earlier in that tense conference room, the words that had stopped everyone in their tracks and forced her to reconsider everything she believed about leadership and trust. Sometimes the most powerful answer in a room full of authority was not the loudest voice or the harshest command. Sometimes it was the calm voice of someone who refused to let anger define their character. The calm reply that day had not only exposed betrayal and saved a company from disaster, it had done something far more meaningful. It had reminded everyone who witnessed it that real strength does not come from power, titles, or fear. Real strength comes from integrity. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who changes everything.